this clipping, we would understand about the simultaneous changes in the demand and in the supply and the resultant change in the equilibrium price and the output, right? So, the demand and the supply being the market forces, you know that they can change, right? So, when there is going to be an increase in the demand and there is going to be an increase in the supply also simultaneously, what would the outcome be? Right? That depends upon how big a change in the demand is going to be and how big a change in the supply is going to be. So, we would be discussing 3 cases here, right? So, the first case is that of the increase in the demand being much more than the increase in the supply, right? Then we would move on to understand the case where increase in the demand is just equal to the increase in the supply. The third case would be that of the increase in the demand being much lesser than the increase in the supply. So, the 3 different cases, simultaneously there is an increase in the demand, increase in the supply, but then you see increase can be more in one than that of the other, so that will change the outcome, fine. So, let's understand this through a diagram. Measuring the price here and then the quantity supplied and the demanded over here along the x-axis. Always start with the demand and the supply intersection, which depicts the equilibrium price, fine. Now, what is this case? Increase in the demand also and increase in the supply. So, increase in the demand can be depicted as a rightward shift, you know that, fine. So, what are we going to depict here? Increase in the demand which is larger than the increase in the supply. So, ensure that the gap between the original demand curve and the new demand curve is going to be much larger than the gap between the original supply curve and the new supply curve. So, increase in the demand can be depicted as a rightward shift from D, it's going to become D1 now, fine. Increase in supply, that will also be depicted as a rightward shift. But then, see, this is going to be a smaller change compared to this, isn't it? So, look at this, I am showing a very small gap. Nevertheless, this will still be an increase, right? From S to S1, fine, right? So, originally the equilibrium was at E, where D and S were intersecting, fine. Now, the new equilibrium will be on S1 and D1's intersection, that is to the right, fine. What do you understand? On the new supply curve, the new demand curve will be intersecting and the new quantity demanded is equal to the new quantity supplied at E1, which is to the right of E. Alright, so just try and find out what is the quantity transacted. The quantity transacted along the new equilibrium is a much higher quantity, and what about the price? The price is also a much higher price. So, what is the effect here? Increase in the demand is larger than the increase in supply. In such a case, the effect that is recorded is the new equilibrium will be attained. The new equilibrium will be attained at a higher price, and the new equilibrium will also be attained at a higher quantity. Fine. So, at E1, on a higher price and at a higher quantity, the market will attain the new equilibrium. So, this is the outcome when this is going to be the change in the market. Right. Let's take up the second case. In the second case, increase in demand will just be equal to the increase in the supply. Increase in demand is simply going to be matched by an increase in the supply. So, what happens in such a case? In such a case, let's again begin with the demand and the supply equality. At price P, the market attains its equilibrium. OQ is the equilibrium output, OP is the equilibrium price, okay, and the demand is equal to the quantity, demand is equal to the quantity supplied at E. Now, increase in demand, fine, will be depicted as a rightward shift in the demand curve. So, demand curve shifts from D to D1, right? Okay, look at this, look at this. This is going to be a rightward shift, and the increase in supply is simply going to be matching the increase in the demand, or increase in demand is equal to the increase in the supply. Okay, so this is going to be a rightward shift in the supply curve indicating an increase in the supply. Fine. What's happening here? Increase in the demand, the gap between D and D1 is the same as the gap between S and S1, indicating increase in demand is equal to the increase in the supply. In such a case, the price does not change. At the same price, the market will be attaining its equilibrium to the right of the original equilibrium on the new supply and the new demand curves at a higher quantity. So, what is the effect? Let's mark it here. The price remains constant. At a constant price, the new equilibrium will be attained at a higher output. Fine. See, simultaneously, there is an increase in the demand as well as an increase in the supply. But in the two cases, the outcome is different. Here, the first case, the increase in demand is much larger than the increase in the supply. The second case, increase in the demand is simply equal to the increase in the supply. The outcomes, they are different in these two cases. What about the third one? So let's try and understand that through a diagram. So, measuring the price and the output along the y and the x axis, the market equilibrium is attained when the quantity demanded is equal to the quantity supplied at some specific price level P. Fine. Now, increase in demand, okay, is going to be lesser than the increase in the supply. So, ensure that the gap between the original demand curve and the new demand curve is much smaller. Again, the arrow marks, look at the arrow marks. Every time, ensure that you show the arrow mark, rightward shift from D to D1. Okay. And what about the increase in supply? Increase in supply is going to be much greater. Okay. So, the gap between the original supply curve and the new supply curve, ensure that it's going to be much larger. Fine. Look at this. S is going to shift on to S1. So, this is the original equilibrium at S and D, and mark that, that's going to be E. Fine. Now, demand increases, but that increase in demand is going to be less than the increase in the supply. Okay. So, yes, S to S1, then D to D1. So, the new demand curve and the new supply curve, they meet here at E1. And E1, it is the new equilibrium which is arrived at a lower price and at a higher output. Yes, so let's record that. When demand increase is less than the supply increase, the market will attain its equilibrium at a lower price and at a higher output. So, what's the common thing that you see here? What's the common thing? Output increases, output increases, output increases. Yeah, why not? What are we discussing after all? We are discussing increase in demand and increase in supply. Yeah, so that means greater amount is going to be transacted in the market, isn't it? So, commonly in all the three cases, we understand that the output is increasing. But the outcome is different only in the case of the equilibrium price. Yes? In the first case, the new equilibrium price is a higher one. In the second case, there is no change in the equilibrium price. And the third one, the new equilibrium will be attained at a lower price. Yes? So, the change, simultaneous change in the demand and in the supply, that brings in three different outcomes in the market. Fine? So, that's what we have understood through these diagrams. Right? Now, will there be a decrease in the demand and also a simultaneous decrease in the supply? Yes, that's also very much possible, isn't it? Yeah. So let's try and understand that through a diagram. Fine. So I'm just going to take this off and make minimal changes in this. Right. Let's try and understand the next case. What is that case? When there is going to be a fall in the demand, and that fall in the demand is going to be much greater than the fall in the supply. Right? So simultaneously, the demand as well as the supply, they are going to reduce. Right? So start with the demand being equal to the supply at a specific price, or the market is attaining its equilibrium at the price level P, and the quantity that is transacted in the market is OQ. Fine. Now, demand is going to fall. So that can be depicted as a leftward shift, right? And the fall in the demand is much greater than the fall in the supply. So, remember to show a big gap here between the original demand curve and the new demand curve. Fine. Yes? This one, fall in the supply. Supply curve will also shift to the left, but then a small decrease only. So, from S, the supply curve will shift on to the left, S1. Mark that through an arrow mark. Fine. So, the new supply curve and the new demand curve, S1 and D1, they are going to meet to the left of the original equilibrium at E1, and that new equilibrium will be attained at a lower price and at a lower output. Yes? What is the understanding here? Simultaneously, when there is going to be a fall in the demand and fall in the supply, and when the fall in the demand is going to be much greater than the fall in the supply, then the outcome in the market will be such that at a reduced price and at a reduced output, the market will be attaining the new equilibrium. Okay, right? So that's one case. Then, the next case can be such that the fall in the demand will be simply matched by the fall in the supply. Yes? Decrease in the demand is going to be matched by a decrease in the supply. That's the second case. Alright. So, let's understand that through a diagram. Price, equilibrium price is determined when the demand is equal to the supply. Okay. Now, what is the change in the demand? There will be a fall in the demand, right? And that is simply going to be equal to the fall in the supply. So, fall in the demand can be understood as a leftward shift, right? So, from D to D1, the demand curve is going to shift, and then fall in the supply, right? So, fall in the supply is going to be equal to the fall in the demand. So, yeah, again, look at this arrow mark. The new supply curve is S1. And the new demand curve is D1, and the original equilibrium, which is E1, now is going to shift on to E1 on the new supply curve and on the new demand curve. And when fall in the demand is going to be matched by a fall in the supply, you see that there is no change in the price. At the same price or at a constant price, right, there would be a fall in the quantity in the market. That is, a lower output will be transacted in the market at the same price. Right? So this is the second outcome, when the fall in the demand is going to be matched by a fall in the supply at a constant price, and at a lower output, the market will attain its new equilibrium. Right? So that's a outcome number 2. Right? Then, what about the other change? When the fall in the demand is going to be lesser than the fall in the supply. That also happens, isn't it? Yeah, maybe there is just a small little technology change, right? There is going to be a small little technology change, and then there is going to be a change in the demand, right? The two may not be matching each other. What are we looking at? The fall in the demand, which is going to be much lesser. Just a small little fall in the income, and the demand is slightly going to reduce, right? But then obsolescence in the technology, in the production technology, that is going to be much bigger, and as a result of that, fall in the supply is going to be much greater. Things like this, they keep happening, isn't it? So who's going to demand? It's going to be the consumers. That's going to be a different group. Who's going to supply? That's going to be yet another group. Fine, the firms they are going to supply, the producers they are going to supply. Fine, so completely by different factors they are getting affected over here, and that's the reason why these 3 different outcomes we are discussing, right? Because demand that is put up by the consumers or the households, and the supply, they are going to be done by the producers, the entrepreneurs. Right? The motive is different. Right? Factors affecting these 2 market forces, they are different. So there's very much a chance that in reality, these 3 different outcomes is very much a possibility. Right? So over here, starting with the original equilibrium, right? When the market price is P, the demand is going to be equal to the supply at E. At E, the quantity demand is equal to the quantity supply. And then there is going to be a fall in the demand, which is much lesser. So that means the distance between the D and the D1 curve make it much smaller. Demand is shifting to the left, indicating there is a fall in the demand. Okay. Then supply is going to reduce too, it's going to fall too. So that means that can also be depicted through a leftward shift. Right? So what's happening here? S is shifting to S1, D is shifting to D1. So the new equilibrium will be on the new supply and the new demand curve at probably E1. So look at the outcome. At a higher price, the market is attaining its equilibrium at a lower level of output. What is the? Let's record the outcome. At a higher price, the market is attaining the equilibrium at a lower level of output. Look at the arrow marks, you will be able to immediately understand. Yes? At a lower level of output, okay, and at a higher level of price, the market is attaining its new equilibrium at E1. Right? So once more, what do you see here? What do you see here? In the first case, lower output. In the second case, lower output. And in the third case, lower output. But then the effect on the market price alone is different. Now, why will there not be a lower output? After all, what are we discussing? We are discussing about the fall in the demand and also fall in the supply. Right? When supply and demand, both of them fall, naturally the output that is transacted in the market will be lower, isn't it? So in all the 3 cases, the output falls, but the outcome on the price alone is different. Right? So when the fall in the demand is much larger, the price falls. when the fall in the demand is equal to the fall in the supply, the price remains constant. And at last, when the fall in the demand is lesser than the fall in the supply, then the market price is higher and the output is lower and the new equilibrium is attained at a high price. Right? So these are the three different outcomes that we understand in reality when there is going to be change in the demand as well as a simultaneous change in the supply. Right? So there are n number of possibilities like this. Very few possibilities I have discussed out here. Fine. Sometimes it so happens that the demand might not change at all. Fine. A perfectly inelastic demand, or there could be a perfectly inelastic supply, isn't it? And having a perfectly inelastic demand or a perfectly inelastic supply, just one factor alone might change. Fine. So those are all extreme cases which very well is a possibility in any of the market, isn't it? Yeah. So some such cases we would be discussing in the upcoming classes. Hope you understood till here. Yes. Namaste.